everyone. Great to see you back on the channel. And listen, if you're into detailed breakdowns of real cases, go ahead and hit the like button. Right now, drop a comment and subscribe. I put out new videos often, so there's always going to be something for us to dig into. Today, we're heading to Australia. No long setup, no talking around it. We're starting with the kind of facts that immediately make you uncomfortable. October 2014. Brisbane, in the upscale neighborhood of Tenerife. Inside one well-kept apartment complex, a heavy, sickening smell suddenly started spreading through the building. It was coming from under the door of a ground-floor apartment. The tenant, a man named Marcus Volka, told frustrated neighbors he had been making broth. The meat had badly burned, and the smell would clear out soon. But because his electric cooktop had been running at full power for hours, it broke down. So Marcus called a repairman. The electrician needed access to the main electrical panel, which meant the owner of the apartment had to come over that evening. When the owner stepped inside, he immediately noticed strange drops on the floor. It was dried blood. Marcus was standing nearby with his hand tightly bandaged, and he calmly explained it away as a random accident around the apartment. The property owner did not argue. He simply waited for the right moment, quietly took a photo of the stains on his phone, walked outside, and called the police. Officers arrived quickly and knocked on the door. Marcus opened it. He asked them for a couple of minutes so he could secure the dog, then walked into his bedroom and locked the door from the inside. Time passed, but he did not come back out. The officers forced the door open, and the room was completely empty. The window was wide open. The tenant had run. The officers then moved into the kitchen, where that same awful smell was coming from. Sitting on the broken cooktop was a massive metal pot. When the officers lifted the lid, they found human remains inside. So who was the tenant who ran from that apartment? And who was found in that pot? To understand how things reached that point, we need to rewind. The man who jumped out of the bedroom window and disappeared into the evening streets was, on paper, just an ordinary food service worker. But let's look at who he was behind closed doors and how he ended up in that apartment in the first place. Marcus Volka was born in 1986 in Ballarat, a city in southeastern Australia. His parents ran a small business. They owned a popular local restaurant, and in their spare time, they worked as karate instructors. Marcus's early years played out around cookware, busy service hours, and a constant flow of customers. Watching the chefs work, he decided to follow the same path. Marcus trained, earned his culinary qualification, and got a job in the field not far from home. To his family, his life story looked spotless. An independent, polite young man steadily building a career. But by 2012, that clean image had started to crack. Marcus had developed a serious gambling problem. He was constantly placing bets, losing large amounts of money, and before long, he was buried under debt. His kitchen wages barely covered basic expenses, and there was simply no way to keep up with obligations that kept piling up fast. He needed another source of income, something that paid quickly in cash. The solution he found was not exactly typical. Marcus created a profile on an adult services platform. A few client meetings a week brought in the kind of money he would have needed months to earn in a restaurant. The financial pressure eased a little, and Marcus did not want to walk away from easy cash. Before long, he moved to Melbourne, a major city where it was much easier to blend in. There, he got steady work at a well-known local adult venue called Pleasure Dome. From that point on, his life was split into two completely separate worlds. During the day, he stood at the stove, prepped ingredients, and sent plates out to the dining room. At night, he went to work serving clients at an upscale private club. What stands out is how smoothly he kept the story going for the people closest to him. His relatives back in Ballarat had no idea. They were proud of their son, believing his rare phone calls were simply the result of long, exhausting shifts in food service. They had no clue about the gambling debts, and they knew nothing about his nighttime work. But his co-workers at the club saw him without the act. Inside Pleasure Dome, Marcus was nothing like the agreeable young man his parents thought they knew. Staff described him as someone with a difficult personality and unpredictable mood swings. He could snap over the smallest thing. But the main reason many co-workers were openly afraid of him came down to something else. Marcus regularly brought a real firearm with him to his night shifts, a secretive young man under serious financial pressure, carrying a weapon in his belongings, living under the strain of constant lies. That was who Marcus was when he crossed paths with a new employee in the halls of the Melbourne club. This was someone who had come to Australia chasing a different dream, and who was also carefully hiding the truth from family back home. To understand exactly who entered Marcus's life, we need to shift locations and go back several years to Indonesia. In 1987, in Lampung province, a baby was born and given the name Febri Andriansyah. Biologically, Febri was male, but from early on, there was a deep disconnect with the body Febri had been born into. In a traditional society, situations like this are often met with harsh rejection, and the first person who refused to accept Febri's identity was Febri's own mother, Nining Sukarni. She would not accept it under any circumstances. As a result, the responsibility for raising Febri fell almost entirely to the grandmother. She was the one who gave Febri the basic support every teenager needs. As the oldest of 3 siblings, Febri understood from a young age that the family's financial weight was falling on his shoulders. At first, he tried to earn money the regular way, working as a hairstylist, then as a nail technician in local beauty salons. But the income barely covered basic food. The whole family depended on his support, and the goal he was working toward required a completely different kind of money. The plan was a full physical transition and a move to a place where he would not have to hide who he really was because of rigid social expectations. After saving up enough to get started, Febri left for Thailand. There, he went through a series of expensive and complicated gender-affirming surgeries. That step gave him a major boost in confidence. After the medical procedures were complete, and after a long recovery, the person who returned home was a woman who officially took a new name, Mayang Prasetyo. Now, imagine trying to explain to a conservative Indonesian family where these large amounts of money were coming from, money that was now supporting the entire household. Mayang came up with a perfect cover story. She told her mother and sisters that she had built a successful modeling career overseas and that her schedule was booked out months in advance. That was how she explained the regular school payments for her younger sisters, along with the constant money transfers to her grandmother for rent, groceries, and everyday needs. In reality, Mayang's income came from adult services. She started working in adult clubs across Asia, and by 2012, she had moved to Australia. That move was not random. In Melbourne, clients paid far more, and people did not look at her through the same lens of judgment. Her biggest priority in this new country was legal status. She needed a visa badly if she wanted to stay on the continent for good. To make quick money, Mayang took a job at that same upscale adult venue, Pleasure Dome, and just take in the setup for a second. Under one roof, you now had two people who had spent years professionally lying to their families about how they were paying the bills. One was hiding his nighttime work because of gambling debts and regularly carrying a real handgun. The other was hiding her escort work from relatives and desperately looking for a way to build a legal life in a foreign country. Sooner or later, meeting in the halls of that place was almost guaranteed. When two people with huge secrets meet in a place as specific as Pleasure Dome, the relationship is rarely built on classic romance. Let's look at the hard facts and the logic behind this arrangement. What unfolded was a perfect, practical partnership. Marcus was buried in problems. Debt collectors and creditors would not leave him alone. Mayang, meanwhile, was in high demand with wealthy clients and was making serious money. For Marcus, she became a financial shield, a steady source of income that helped cover his growing debts. In return, Marcus's citizenship solved Mayang's biggest life problem. Officially becoming the wife of a local resident gave her a solid path to getting a visa, legalizing her status, and leaving behind the idea of ever having to return to the conservative world she came from. They started dating, and before long, they flew to Indonesia together so Marcus could meet Mayang's family. And honestly, he knew how to play the part. During the visit, he was quiet, respectful, and careful with every word. He quickly won the family over. Mayang's mother gave the relationship her official blessing, but the way she said it tells you a lot. In front of everyone, she said she had no objection if this foreign man married her son. Even in that moment, she refused to acknowledge Mayang as her daughter. After returning to Australia, the couple moved quickly. Marcus landed a chef contract on a cruise ship, and they went to sea together. In August 2013, when the ship made a longer stop in the port of Copenhagen, they went to the local city office and officially registered their marriage. No big celebration, no family event, no romantic production, just a legal step that put their status on paper. Now they had documents, and they had a shared goal. The newlyweds rented that same ground floor apartment in a prestigious part of Brisbane. Putting a good rental under both their names and getting a dog was not just about building a comfortable home together. These were basic pieces of evidence for immigration officials. They needed to show a real shared life, so no one would suspect the marriage was only for paperwork. Just think about the scale of the daily lie they were living. Mayang's Indonesian relatives at least knew there was a foreign chef in the picture, but Marcus's family back in Australia knew absolutely nothing. He never told his parents he had gotten married. He never even told them he had a partner. And he knew exactly why. His conservative family would start asking questions, introducing them to his transgender spouse from the adult services world would destroy the image of the perfect son he had worked so hard to maintain. So he simply erased his wife from his official life story. Think about the pressure these two were carrying. Every day, they walked into that apartment, shut the door, and entered a reality where both of them were lying to everyone around them. The only question was how long that artificial setup could hold once they started sharing one small space around the clock. Once they settled into the new place, the couple ran straight into reality. Their comfortable apartment quickly turned into a non-stop workstation. Picture their daily schedule. During the day, Marcus worked brutal shifts in restaurant kitchens, on his feet for hours beside hot stoves. In the evening, he came home, but not to rest. That was when his second, hidden job started. He changed clothes and continued seeing clients through the adult services circuit. Mayang worked in the same field, and she also kept a packed schedule of appointments. Under those conditions, the apartment basically turned into a booking hub and a short-stay motel at the same time. Two people working in a very specific line of adult services while sharing the same living space had to keep their schedules locked in with almost no room for error. The arrangement was simple. If one of them brought a guest home, the other had to clear out and take their own appointment somewhere else, maybe by renting a room at a nearby hotel. When that system broke down, it meant canceled meetings, lost money, and very unhappy visitors. Because they were both physically drained and running on almost no sleep, Marcus and Mayang started making mistakes with their timing. Scheduling overlaps happened more and more often, and, as you would expect, that led to heated fights at home. Residents of the upscale complex ended up hearing those arguments, whether they wanted to or not. Neighbors later said they regularly heard shouting, swearing, and the sound of objects breaking through the walls. But the most important part, if we want to understand what was really going on, is what those fights were about. During those conflicts, Mayang found Marcus's weakest spot and started using it against him with precision. Witnesses heard her more than once, raising her voice and laying down a hard ultimatum. She told Marcus directly that if he did not give her access to the apartment and work around her schedule, she would pick up the phone and call his parents. She said she would tell them everything, that their perfect son was drowning in debt, working adult service appointments for wealthy clients, and that his legal spouse had been assigned male at birth. Let's pause right there and look at the stakes clearly. For a guy who had spent years building this spotless image of an independent chef, and who was terrified of being exposed, those words were not just insulting things said during an argument. They were a direct threat to destroy his entire reputation. Mayang had her finger on the reset button of his made-up life. She was pressing on his biggest fear to control the space they both depended on. Every fight like that pushed Marcus further into a corner. He could not simply walk away from the relationship because he still relied on her money to cover his debts. Inside the tight space of that apartment, anger was building fast, and regular conversation was no longer enough to bring it back down. Everything was stretched to the limit, and all it needed was one wrong move. That wrong move came on October 2nd, 2014. The Thursday started like any other. Both partners worked their legitimate daytime schedules, then moved into their nighttime adult service bookings. Marcus had already arranged to meet one of his clients, and he brought that person right to the door of their apartment in the Tenerife complex. He had no doubt the place was empty. He put the key in, unlocked the door, walked inside with his guest, and immediately ran into Mayang. It was the exact scheduling failure they both feared. Mayang was home, and at that very moment, she was hosting a visitor of her own. The reaction was immediate and intense. Mayang was furious over what she saw as a serious violation of their basic agreement about using the apartment. She flat out refused to let her husband inside and, in no uncertain terms, ordered him to leave with the person he had brought there. Marcus was left in an extremely awkward position in front of his client. He did not make a public scene. He simply turned around in silence and walked away from the apartment. But the conflict did not end there. Just a few minutes later, Marcus's cell phone rang. His wife's name was on the screen. Mayang had no intention of cooling things down. She yelled at him over the phone, saying his sudden arrival had almost ruined her paid appointment, and she demanded that he never show up at home again without calling first. Once she had said what she wanted to say, she hung up. Marcus had barely taken a few steps before the phone rang again. It was another round of complaints from his wife. After that second call, Marcus apologized to his client. On the spot, he came up with a story that his dog had suddenly developed a health issue and needed him right away. He canceled the appointment and headed back home. What happened after he returned to the apartment was heard across the entire first floor. Residents became unwilling witnesses to a serious confrontation. From behind the closed door, they heard non-stop yelling, loud swearing, and the sound of impacts. The argument kept going for most of the evening. Only closer to midnight did the noise finally begin to fade. People in the building had managed to fall asleep when, at 2 a.m. on October 3, they were woken up by another explosive round of aggression. Neighbors jolted awake as Mayang shouted insults at Marcus at the top of her voice. Doors were slamming inside the apartment. The noise was so intense that several residents seriously started talking about calling emergency services and asking officers to step in. They stood in the hallway, listening to what was happening, trying to decide whether they should make that call. And right then, the whole dynamic of the fight changed. In 1 second, every sound of the struggle and every shout cut off. The noise stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The neighbors waited by their doors for another couple of minutes. To them, the logical explanation was simple. The couple had finally worn themselves out, stopped arguing, and gone to bed. So they went back to their own rooms too. None of them had any idea what had actually made Mayang go silent for good. So what does a person do after committing an irreversible crime in their own bedroom? There is no exact picture of how Mayang's life ended. There were no witnesses inside the apartment, and the offender did not leave behind personal journals or any final written confession. But we can piece together the unsettling timeline of that day, step by step, using only the plain records that remained. Medical notes, supermarket receipts, and street security camera footage. After the shouting suddenly stopped at 2 a.m, the apartment went completely quiet. By noon on October 3, a smell began spreading across the first floor of the upscale apartment complex. At first, it was not overwhelmingly strong, but it was heavy, unpleasant, and hard to ignore. Inside the locked apartment, the aftermath of what had happened overnight was already starting to show. One neighbor could not take the sweet, foul odor anymore. He grabbed a can of air freshener and sprayed it heavily right outside the couple's door, hoping to cover the smell. Marcus ignored everything happening outside. He had barricaded himself inside and stayed completely isolated until after dark. Only at 8 that evening did street security cameras capture him leaving the building for the first time. Marcus walked quickly to a nearby grocery store. At the register, he calmly paid for a very telling list of items: several bottles of heavy-duty bleach, a pack of thick rubber gloves, heavy plastic trash bags, a roll of rope, and strong duct tape. When he returned to the apartment with those purchases, the chef began cleaning up. Using his professional kitchen skills and sharp work tools, he started methodically trying to remove the evidence. Some of the remains were wrapped tightly in the bags he had bought, secured with duct tape, and pushed deep into the drum of the washing machine. But during that disturbing process, his plan hit a serious problem. One careless movement with the blade, and Marcus suffered a deep cut to his own hand that would not stop bleeding. Realizing he could not handle the injury on his own, he left everything behind in the middle of the night and headed quickly to the emergency room at a local hospital. He lied straight to the doctor on duty, telling a story he had made up on the spot. According to Marcus, he had gotten into a serious argument with an aggressive girlfriend. She had supposedly lost control and came at him with a knife, and the injury happened when he tried to knock the weapon out of her hand. The medical staff simply stitched the cut, wrapped it tightly, and sent him home. After returning from the clinic, Marcus made a drastic decision. He wanted to destroy what was left of the evidence by boiling it for hours. He pulled out a huge metal pot, placed the remains inside, poured chemicals over them, and turned the cooktop all the way up. That disturbing setup is what created the unbearable, sickening vapor that spread through the entire floor over the next day. But the chef's plan failed because of basic physics. The apartment's electrical system was not built to handle that kind of extreme, non-stop strain, and the cooktop wiring burned out. Now trapped in the kitchen with broken equipment and a situation he could not fix, Marcus had no choice but to call an electrician. That call is what led to the property owner showing up. After officers found the horrifying scene on the broken cooktop and realized the man who had escaped through the window had left separated human remains behind, patrol officers immediately radioed for backup. The quiet, high-end neighborhood of Tenerife was quickly sealed off around the perimeter. Experienced handlers arrived with search dogs to track the escaped tenant before he could make it out of the city. The dogs picked up the fresh trail fast, but the escape route turned out to be surprisingly short. They led investigators just a couple of nearby streets away from the apartment complex, then stopped beside a large industrial dumpster. When officers lifted the heavy metal lid and shined their flashlights inside, they found Marcus Volka's body. Once he was out on the nighttime street, Marcus clearly understood where things stood. He knew officers were already inside the apartment. He knew the double life he had spent years building had collapsed in a single second, and he did not try to outrun the law or buy a ticket to another state. He ended his life right there, inside that filthy dumpster. Later, medical examiners would perform an official examination and release a detailed toxicology report. They found no alcohol in Marcus's system and no trace of prohibited substances. His final decision was made with a completely clear and sober mind. And with that, the major criminal case effectively hit a dead end. There was no one left to put on trial for what had happened. Forensic teams carefully recovered Mayang Prasetyo's remains from the broken household equipment, confirmed her identity, and officially sent her casket back home to Indonesia. You might think that would be the natural place for this case to end. But the final turn in this story is honestly hard to process because of just how cold it was. Not long after the tragedy, Nining Sukarni gave a major public interview to the local press. In her official statement, there was not one word of grief for her own daughter, whose life had been taken in such a brutal way. Instead, Mayang's mother publicly apologized to Marcus Volka's relatives. On camera, she said she was sincerely sorry if Mayang had somehow pushed the Australian man too far and triggered such a horrific act of aggression. To the public, it sounded completely absurd. An apology to the offender, as if the victim had somehow been too inconvenient. Mayang's burial was also carried out against everything she had fought for so desperately while she was alive. Her conservative family completely ignored Mayang Prasetyo's identity. At the cemetery, they held a quiet farewell for a man named Febri Andriansyah. On the granite headstone, relatives coldly placed an old photograph taken long before the move to Thailand and the expensive medical transition. They erased the very person whose money had helped pay their bills for years, supported her sister's education, and kept the family in decent housing. And that is how the collision of two broken people who built their marriage on mutual financial benefit and non-stop lies ended in a real physical catastrophe where nobody won. Take in that heavy ending, and make sure you let me know in the comments what you personally think about the family's shocking reaction to what happened. That brings our detailed breakdown of this case to a close. Thank you for watching until the end. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon in the next episodes.
Support us by liking and subscribing. Share your theories in the comments. Until next time, stay vigilant.